Claire Whitfield had not cried in 3 years, and she was not going to start on a Tuesday morning in front of 40 employees who were pretending not to watch. "You're 22 minutes late," she said, and her voice came out flatter than she intended. Flatter than she wanted, but flat was the only register she trusted herself to use anymore. "This is the 4th time this month." The man standing in front of her desk didn't argue. He just stood there in his faded navy work jacket, hands loose at his sides, dark hair still damp like he'd showered in a hurry, and said, "I know. I'm sorry." That was it. No excuse. No story about traffic or a sick relative or a broken-down car. Just an apology, quiet and complete. Like he'd already accepted whatever was coming. Claire almost respected that, almost. "I run a company with 300 people depending on it," she said. "I can't have a facilities lead who can't get here on time. You understand that." "I do." "Then you understand I have to let you go." Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not even surprise, just a kind of tired resignation that made Claire's stomach tighten in a way she didn't examine. He nodded once, reached into his jacket for his badge, and in pulling it free, something else came loose from the inner pocket and fluttered to the floor between them. A photograph, small, worn soft at the corners, the kind of photo that had been carried and recarried until the gloss had gone matte. Daniel bent for it immediately, too fast, like a reflex built from practice. But Claire had already seen it. She had seen the gap-toothed grin, the cowlick that never stayed down no matter how many times she'd tried to comb it flat, the small hand raised in a wave against a background of blue playground equipment. Her son, Ethan, 7 years old in that photograph. 7 years old forever now. "Where did you get that?" Claire said, and the flatness in her voice cracked clean down the middle. Daniel's hand had closed around the photo, but he didn't pull it away from her. Didn't hide it. He looked at her with an expression she would spend the rest of the day trying to name. "Mrs. Whitfield, where did you get a photo of my son?" The office had gone silent around them. Someone near the copier had stopped pretending to work. Daniel glanced at the small crowd, then back at Claire, and something in him seemed to decide that there was no version of this conversation that could happen quietly, so it might as well happen honestly. "I was off duty," he said. 3 years ago. October the 9th. I was driving home from a shift and I saw the accident happen at the corner of 5th and Larch. I got to him before the ambulance did." The room tilted. Claire heard herself say, "You were the one." Not a question. She had spent 3 years trying to picture the stranger the police report had mentioned, a bystander performed CPR until paramedics arrived, and had never once put a face to those words, because faces made it real in a way she hadn't been ready for. "I stayed with him," Daniel said, and his voice had gone rough now, unguarded. "I talked to him the whole time. I told him help was coming. I didn't." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't want him to be scared." Claire's legs did not feel entirely like her own anymore. She lowered herself into the chair behind her, the CEO's chair, the chair she had sat in through 100 confident negotiations, and she found she had nothing confident left in her at all. "Someone from the hospital gave me that photo," Daniel continued. "A nurse. She said his mother had dropped her bag in the chaos and it fell out, and nobody knew whose it was until later, and by then I guess it just stayed with me. I know I should have given it back. I tried to find out who you were, but by the time I asked, you'd already moved, and I didn't know how to just show up at someone's door with that, so you carried it. Every day, I became an EMT full-time 6 months after. I tell people it's because I wanted to help people the way I helped him. That's true, but it's also because I didn't want to stop thinking about him. I didn't want him to become a shift report I filed and forgot." Claire pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. She was aware, distantly, of her employees drifting back to their desks to give her privacy she hadn't asked for and desperately needed. She was aware of Daniel still standing there, badge in one hand, photograph in the other, waiting to see whether she wanted him gone or wanted him to stay, and clearly prepared for either. "Why are you late all the time?" she finally said. "Really?" Daniel exhaled. "October 9th? That's this week. I go to the cemetery before my shift starts. I don't tell anyone because it sounds strange. A grown man visiting a boy he knew for 11 minutes. But I go every year, and this year I couldn't get myself to leave on time. And I knew I was going to be late for work, and I came anyway, because I didn't want to lie about where I'd been. Claire hadn't been to Ethan's grave in 4 months. She told herself it was because of the acquisition closing, the board meetings, the 11-hour days that left no room for grief, and some small honest part of her had always known that was a story she was telling herself so she wouldn't have to feel what she was about to feel right now. Sitting in this office, looking at a stranger who had loved her son for 11 minutes and never stopped. "I'm not firing you," she said. "Mrs. Whitfield, you don't have to." "I'm not firing you," she said again, steadier now, "and I would like you to sit down, because I think we have a great deal to talk about, and I don't think either of us should be standing for it." He sat. They talked until the building emptied out around them, until the cleaning crew Daniel used to supervise came through and left again. Tactfully, without a word, he told her about Ethan's last conscious minutes, that he'd asked twice if his mom was coming, and that Daniel had promised him she was, because it was the only thing he could offer that might make 11 minutes feel survivable. Claire cried for the first time in 3 years, openly, without apologizing for it, and Daniel didn't try to fix it or rush her through it. He just stayed the way he'd learned to stay, because he understood better than almost anyone alive that sometimes the only thing a person needs is for someone to not leave. "I want to see the photo again," Claire said eventually. When the crying had quieted into something calmer, Daniel handed it over without hesitation, and she held it the way she used to hold Ethan himself, careful, like something that could still somehow be lost twice. "Keep it," she said, pushing it back toward him. "You've kept him alive in a way I stopped letting myself do. I think you should keep it." "I couldn't. You held on to my son when I couldn't be there. I'm not going to take that away from you. Now." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, a very unexecutive gesture that would have mortified her a week ago, and now felt like the only honest thing she'd done in months. "But I want you to have coffee with me, not as an employee, not as whatever this is. I want to know more. About that day, about you, about why a man who saves lives for a living was scared to knock on a stranger's door." Daniel almost smiled. "I could ask you the same. Why a woman who runs a company that big never went looking for the man in the police report." "Because I was afraid of what I'd feel if I found him," Claire admitted. "Turns out I was right to be afraid. I just didn't expect it to feel like this." Coffee turned into dinner 3 days later, at a small place near the harbor that Daniel liked, because it was quiet and nobody recognized him there as either the EMT who'd been on the news once, briefly, or the man who used to sweep the floors of Whitfield Innovations. Claire found herself laughing, actually laughing. Not the practiced version she performed in board meetings, at his stories, about ridiculous 911 calls, and Daniel found himself watching her laugh like it was something rare and worth memorizing. Dinner turned into weeks. Weeks turned into a standing Sunday morning ritual. Coffee at Claire's kitchen table, where Daniel taught her slowly how to talk about Ethan without flinching, and Claire taught him slowly that carrying someone doesn't have to mean carrying them alone. In November, she asked him to come with her to the cemetery. He said yes before she finished the sentence. They stood together at Ethan's grave, the wind moving through the bare branches overhead, and Claire knelt to brush leaves from the small granite marker, the way she used to smooth his cowlick down, uselessly out of habit and love. Daniel knelt beside her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Thank you," Claire finally said, "for not letting him be scared." "Thank you," Daniel said, "for not letting me carry him by myself anymore." By spring, Whitfield Innovations had a new pediatric emergency response fund, quietly established, named for a 7-year-old boy with a cowlick that never stayed down. Daniel left his facilities job. Claire had insisted gently that a man who'd chosen EMT work over corporate hours belonged back in the field, and had personally called in a favor to get him transferred to the county's top trauma unit. He kept the photograph in his jacket pocket still, but it wasn't the only thing he carried anymore. He carried Sunday mornings at Claire's kitchen table, and her laugh when it was unguarded, and the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned, finally, that grief and love could sit at the same table without one having to leave room for the other. Claire kept a copy of that same photograph on her desk now, in a small silver frame, right where anyone walking into her office could see it. When people asked about the boy in the picture, She told them the truth that he was her son, that she'd lost him 3 years ago, and that the man who'd stayed beside him at the worst moment of his short life had somehow, impossibly, become the reason she'd learned to stay present in her own. She never fired anyone for being late again without asking why first. Some stories, she had learned, take 22 minutes and an entire lifetime to tell.